Hello and welcome to my channel, where I'll be telling you all kinds of strange stories, ranging from true crime to some much less believable, although just as fascinating, tales. For today's video, we have the troubling tale of Louise Masset. Listen in and see what you think. Louise, also known as Louisa Josephine Masset, was the first person to be executed in Britain in the 20th century. She was hanged at Newgate Prison on Tuesday the 9th of January 1900 for the murder of her son. Here is her story. On Friday the 27th of October 1899 at 6:19 p.m, two women alighted from a train at Dalston Junction Station in North London. Mary Tian, an Isleworth governess, and her dear friend Margaret Biggs were on their way to a lecture at a school on Tottenham Road, Kingsland. But before they left the station, Miss Tian wanted to use the women's restroom. Miss Biggs remained in the ladies' waiting room on platform 3, while her companion went into the restroom at the further end of the same room. Mary Tian attempted to enter the first of two water closets inside the lavatory. Unfortunately, something stood in the way of her progress. The cubicle was dimly lit, but Miss Tian saw something that resembled a child's face in the darkness. Such a thing was obviously not possible, so the stunned woman concluded that what she had witnessed was probably another woman in need of aid. Miss Tian returned to the waiting room, where she met Miss Biggs, and the two women proceeded out onto the platform, where they saw Joseph John Standing, a porter, pulling a barrow. The women informed him that there was a woman in difficulty in one of the cubicles. Joseph quickly sent this information to Mr. Cotterell, the foreman porter, and the two men proceeded to investigate together. There was indeed someone laying behind the door, but it was not a lady who had passed out. The lighting was low, but it looked to be a young child wearing a dark-coloured shawl. The men were horrified to discover the body of a small child, nude save for a black shawl covering his waist. The boy's head was angled toward the corridor, while his feet were pointing toward the restroom. The child's face was covered in blood, and a shattered clinker brick lay beside his head. This is a hard brick used as a paving stone. Dr. James Patrick Fennell conducted his examination at 6:55 p.m. He verified that life had ended and said that death had occurred at least 2 hours before. Following a post-mortem investigation, he amended his view somewhat and said that the child died between 2:55 p.m. and 5:55 p.m. However, he believed that death happened between 2 and 3 hours earlier, that is, between 3:55 p.m. and 4:55 p.m. Initially, the police inquiry progressed slowly. Because there was nothing left on the body to identify the child, facts of the crime and a description of the deceased youngster were published in newspapers the following Monday, the 30th of October, in the hope that someone would be able to identify the sad, unlucky child. Helen Eliza Gentle, a children's nurse who resided with her mother, Mrs. Norris, at 210 Clyde Road in Tottenham, saw these newspaper accounts and expressed her concern that the description of the deceased youngster bore a striking similarity to a child she had cared for until the day the body was discovered. Miss Gentle was taken to the morgue, where she definitely recognised Manfred Louis Masset's body. Manfred was 3.5 years old when he died, according to Miss Gentle, and was born on the 24th of April 1896. Louise Masset, the child's mother, had responded to an advertisement Miss Gentle had put in a local newspaper shortly after the child's birth, and after some deliberation had consented to leave the infant in Miss Gentle's care. The issue was that Miss Masset was not married and, with her own livelihood to support, was not in a position to care for the child herself. As a consequence, Manfred was turned over to Miss Gentle in May 1896, and she was paid 37 shillings a month to raise him. This arrangement had been in place until very recently. Manfred's mother used to see him every 2 weeks, but as he grew older she increased her visit to once a week. Louise would visit the residence every Wednesday and sometimes take her child for a stroll. Helen would occasionally join her, and they would often visit a local park called Tottenham Green. A letter dated 2 days earlier and addressed to Mrs. Norris was received at Clyde Road on the 16th of October 1899. The letter was sent by Louise and indicated that Manfred's father, who lived in France, had requested that his son be brought to him for education. Louise had consented to this request and intended to take custody of her child on Friday the 27th of October. Louise paid her regular visit to Clyde Road on Wednesday the 25th of October, and final preparations for the handover were made. Helen Gentle agreed to meet Louise at 12:45 p.m. on Friday outside the Birdcage Public House on Stamford Hill. She kept her appointment, and Helen had last seen Manfred alive when he boarded an omnibus with his mother and headed out for London Bridge railway station, where they would take the train to Newhaven and then the ferry to France. The police naturally wanted to interrogate Louise, so they went to her house at 29 Bethune Road, Stoke Newington. Richard Caddish, who was married to Louise's sister Leonie, owned the house. They verified that Louise had informed them about a journey to France to give up Manfred to his father. She had left home at 12:30 on the 27th of October and had not returned until 9 p.m. on the 29th of October. Louise's demeanour had not changed since that time, and she had now gone out to see some students to whom she taught piano and French. They had no clue when she would be due back. The police decided to wait outside and hide themselves across the street while they waited for Louise to return. What happened was that police saw a man arrive at 29 Bethune Road in the early hours of Tuesday the 31st of October. He proceeded to go into the home, only to emerge moments later with Mr. Caddish. The police decided to pursue the two men, which led them to Stretton Road in Croydon. Mr. Caddish's guest turned out to be George Richard Symes, a gentleman who was married to another of Louise's sisters, and the two men had returned to Mr. Symes's home together. When the police knocked on George's door, they discovered Louise, who was distraught and talking to her two brothers-in-law. Louise had got there at 11 p.m. according to George Symes. She informed him that she had read in the press that the child's body discovered in Dalston had been recognised as Manfred's, and that his mother was being sought in connection with his death. Louise denied any role in Manfred's death, alleging that he was murdered by someone else. She was now telling her account of what had happened to her son for the first time. Louise said that the tale about her trip to France was a lie. She spent the weekend in Brighton with her boyfriend Eudore Lucas. But on the Friday she turned over Manfred to two women who claimed to be launching a private school in Chelsea. She then proceeded to give a lengthy speech describing her version of events. Louise's testimony started with a reference to an occurrence that happened on Wednesday the 4th of October, when she went to Clyde Road as usual. She'd brought Manfred to Tottenham Green, as was her custom, when he got into mischief with a small girl she only knew as Millie. Two ladies sat on a seat nearby, and one of them introduced themselves as Millie's mother. The discussion inevitably led to the children, and the women, the oldest of whom claimed her name was Browning, said that they were considering opening a small private school. Louise said that she was dissatisfied with the lessons provided by Manfred's nurse. Mrs. Browning replied that a place could be secured for Manfred at a cost of £12 a year for board and accommodation, and 10 shillings a month for instruction. The next Wednesday, the 11th of October, Louise took Manfred to the park and ran into the Brownings again. More negotiations over the new school ensued, and Louise eventually decided to put Manfred into their charge. It was agreed that they would meet at London Bridge train station at 2 p.m. on the 27th of October, when she would give over Manfred and £12 in cash. Louise now faced a dilemma. She didn't want to hurt Helen Gentle's feelings, so she made up the tale about sending Manfred to his father in France. However, since she would have to spend some time away from home to support this tale, she would take advantage of the chance to go down to Brighton and have a brief holiday. The police listened intently to her account, but they still believed they had enough evidence to prosecute Louise with murder. She adamantly denied any involvement in Manfred's death. On the 13th of December 1899, Mr. Justice Bruce presided over Louise Masset's trial in the Old Bailey. The prosecution's case was handled by Mr. Charles Matthews and Mr. Richard D. Muir, while Lord Coleridge and Mr. Arthur Hutton defended. The trial continued until the 18th of December, and the evidence against Louise seemed to be overwhelming at first glance. To begin with, Louise and Manfred could easily be shown to have travelled to London Bridge Station as she had suggested. Helen Gentle had seen her getting onto the horse-drawn omnibus outside the Birdcage public house. Thomas Bonner, the bus's conductor, said in court that, according to his records, his vehicle departed Stamford Hill at 12:48 p.m. He recalls seeing a lady and a child sitting together and saw them get off at London Bridge at 1:35 p.m. Bonner was unable to clearly identify Louise, but when given a photograph of the deceased youngster, he claimed it was the same child. Georgina Worley, an attendant in the waiting area on the South London line at London Bridge, saw the woman and child next. She said that the time was 1:42 p.m. and that the pair stayed in the waiting area until approximately 2:30. Georgina had talked with the lady, who said she was waiting for someone to come to the station. She couldn't say for definite that the lady was the defendant, but she had a feeling that was the case. There were 2 female waiting rooms at London Bridge Station, and Ellen Rees was the attendant in the first-class waiting room. She had just started work at 2:30 on the 27th and said that a lady and a child had entered the room soon after, at about 2:40. Ellen Rees recalled the youngster in particular because he was crying. She inquired as to what was wrong with him and was informed that he was missing his nurse. Ellen then inquired as to the age of the child, to which the mother replied that he would be 4 years old in April of next year. Finally, the lady said she'd go and get him a cake, and the 2 of them went off in the direction of the refreshment area. It was about 3 o'clock by this time. So far, there had been little harm done to Louise's tale. She admitted going to London Bridge and initially going into Miss Worley's waiting room, where she said she had made an appointment to see Mrs. Browning at 2 o'clock. When the 2 women still hadn't arrived by 2:30, Louise remembered the other waiting room and speculated they could have been waiting in the incorrect one all along. She had talked with the attendant in the second room and had departed at 3 o'clock. It was 55 minutes later that the Browning ladies finally appeared, apologised for being so late, and took charge of Manfred. Louise was then just in time to catch the 4:07 train to Brighton. The first major issue arose with the rest of Ellen Rees's testimony. She went on to add that she had seen Louise again, this time alone, at 6:50 p.m. Louise was already in the restroom and asked Ellen for a towel so that she could wash her hands. Later she inquired about the next train to Brighton, and Ellen informed her that it was scheduled to depart at 7:20 p.m, warning her that she should hurry if she wanted to catch it. In truth, the train was scheduled to leave at 7:22, but it arrived a few minutes late. Ellen Rees last saw Louise at 7:18 when she left the waiting area to board a train to Brighton. Since then, she had participated in an identification parade and identified the prisoner among a group of other women. There were additional signs that Louise had arrived in Brighton much later than she had reported. Alice Reel worked as a chambermaid at Findlay's Hotel, which was located at 36 Queen's Road in Brighton. She testified that Louise checked in at 9:45 p.m, giving her identity as Miss Brooks and requesting a second room for her brother, who was due to arrive the next day. Louise was also seen by the hotel's owner, John Findlay, who verified that she came around 9:45. Mr. Brooks, who was of course really Eudore Lucas, came the following day and took up the room next door. The two visitors paid their bill on Sunday, but a few days later, when cleaning the rooms, Alice Reel discovered a pair of toy scales. Helen Gentle recognised them as a pair she had brought for Manfred and given to Louise on the 27th of October. More damaging evidence had come from Brighton. On Saturday the 28th of October, Eudore Lucas arrived in Brighton via the train at 2:30. At the time, Louise had met him there. Annie Skeets, an attendant in the waiting room area at Brighton, had discovered a brown paper package 10 minutes later. She carried the package to the cloakroom, but it was not claimed, so it was transported to London Bridge Station and opened. The parcel included a child's jacket and frock, and despite the fact that some of the trimmings had been removed, Helen Gentle recognised the clothing as those Manfred had been wearing when she gave him back to his mother. Furthermore, the brown wrapping paper used on the package could be shown to have been delivered to Louise by Miss Gentle on the 27th, since it was ripped and matched perfectly a tear in another piece that remained at Miss Gentle's residence. Manfred's body was discovered nude, save for a black shawl draped over him. The evidence that purported to connect that shawl directly to Louise was then discussed. Maud Clifford worked as a sales assistant at McElroy's Drapers on 161 High Street in Stoke Newington. She stated that on the 24th of October she sold a black shawl to a woman who resembled the prisoner. The shawls had only been in stock for approximately a week when Maud remembered a client insisting on a black shawl. Maud had also attended an identification parade and recognised Louise, but she could not swear that she was the lady she had served. Ernest Hopkins Mooney, the manager of the same draper's business, said that he had acquired 15 woolen shawls from his supplier on the 16th of October. Only 3 of them were black, and only one of those black shawls was sold. In court, he displayed the 2 remaining shawls and acknowledged that they were identical to the one discovered on Manfred's body. The prosecution claimed that Manfred's murder was motivated by the fact that he was a hindrance to Louise's ongoing relationship with her boyfriend Eudore Lucas. Eudore told the court that he currently lived at 23 Mildmay Grove in Stoke Newington, but used to reside next door to Louise at 31 Bethune Road. Eudore was French and Louise was half French, so it seemed logical that they would get along, despite the fact that she was 36 and he had only turned 19 in that November. Continuing his testimony, Eudore said that he initially met Louise in September of 1898, but that they had only been walking out together for 3 or 4 months. He and 2 friends had gone to Brighton for a weekend trip during Whitsuntide in 1899 together with Louise. They had also stayed at Findlay's on that occasion, but nothing inappropriate had occurred between them. The bond had grown stronger, and approximately 2 or 3 months later, Louise informed him about Manfred. Eudore complimented her for her candour and assured her that it made no difference to their relationship, but he begged her not to bring the child up again. He was unconcerned by the fact that she had given birth to an illegitimate son, and they became even closer. They had not, however, mentioned marriage at any point. Eudore and Louise had met at Liverpool Street Station on either 24th of October or maybe the next day, and she had informed him that she planned to travel down to Brighton the following Friday. He stated he'd want to go with her, but he wouldn't be able to travel down to the seaside until Saturday. He went on to tell her that he would take the train at 2 o'clock, and she told him she would take one at approximately 4:30 on the 27th. They decided to check in as brother and sister under a fictitious identity, and he last saw her on Saturday afternoon at Brighton Station. Eudore said that he and Louise had, despite booking separate rooms, only used one of them on that Brighton trip. They returned to London together on Sunday, arriving at Bethune Road just before 9 o'clock. Louise was in her normal good mood the whole time, and she showed no hint that anything was awry. The prosecution also suggested that Manfred may have been a financial issue and that Louise could have murdered him to save on Helen Gentle's fees. The testimony of Louise's sister, Leonie Kaddish, substantially refuted this reason. Mrs. Kaddish verified that Louise had been a resident of her home since August 1898. Of course, she was aware of Manfred and the arrangements made with Miss Gentle for his care and upbringing. In truth, Leonie had given Miss Gentle a promise that she would pay the 37 shillings if Louise ever defaulted. Leonie had, however, never been asked to make the payments for her sister. Furthermore, Louise lived at 29 Bethune Road for free, and all of the money she made from her private students was for her personal use. Leonie also felt Manfred's father financially supported the youngster, but Louise had never mentioned who he was. In short, though, Louise was unconcerned about money. Concerning Manfred's trip to France, Louise had first talked about it on the 18th of October, but had only filled in the specifics a week later, on the 25th. Louise had come home at 9 o'clock on Sunday, and she had been as calm and collected as normal, according to Leonie. Leonie said that she had never seen the black shawl before, and although not an expert, did not believe it was a new one. Concerning the clinker brick discovered near Manfred's body, it was true that identical bricks were found in her garden, but similar bricks were found in numerous gardens in that area. Furthermore, no bricks were missing from the garden, with the exception of several taken away by the police during their inquiry. Louise went into the witness box to testify on her own behalf. She told the account of giving up Manfred to a lady she knew as Mrs. Browning at London Bridge, and she said that her initial intention had been to go with the youngster to view the school and make sure he was settled in. When the women arrived, Louise informed them that she now only had minutes to make her train and hence would not be able to accompany them to Chelsea. She gave up the child, the clothes bundle and £12 in gold and asked for a receipt. One of the ladies said she'd go and get some paper and ink from the refreshment room, but she hadn't returned by the time Louise's train was scheduled to depart, so she gave up on the idea of obtaining a receipt. Louise wasn't worried. They seemed to be well-to-do women, and she did have their address at 45 King's Road, Chelsea. Unfortunately, further police inquiries revealed that this address was inhabited by a reputable dairyman named Henry Willis, who had never heard of Louise or the Brownings. Louise said that she had taken the 4:07 train to Brighton, arriving at 6:55. She'd gone for a stroll down to the seafront after leaving her Gladstone bag at the left luggage office. She had planned to go to the pier, but it was a rainy day, so she went to Mutton's, a restaurant on King's Road, and had something to eat before heading down to the shops in West Brighton. She then went to the station to get her luggage before checking into the hotel. She was quite definitely not in London at 7:18 p.m. when Ellen Rees claims to have seen her. Dr. Fennell and Dr. Bond provided medical testimony. They all agreed that suffocation was the cause of death. The clinker block appears to have been used to shock the infant before a hand was put over his mouth until he stopped breathing. Dr. Bond went on to say that the most likely time of death was 2 hours before he was found at about 4:30. In the end, the jury decided in just half an hour that Louise was guilty as accused. Louise maintained her innocence once again, but Mr. Justice Bruce wore the black cap and condemned her to death. Was Louise Masset responsible for her son's death? Before we get into that, let's evaluate whether all of the evidence is as solid as it seems. Ellen Rees, who claimed to have seen Louise as late as 7:18 p.m. on the 27th of October, was clearly the most damaging testimony. Mrs. Rees had recognised Louise at an identification parade and had worn spectacles to help her identify her. She acknowledged to not wearing those glasses to work on the 27th of October, but said that she just required them for reading. So why did she put them on for the identification parade? She wasn't reading anything then. Mrs. Rees had also seen a picture of Louise in the local newspaper before coming forward to speak with the police. She revealed that on an ordinary day up to 200 women walked through her waiting area, many of them with children. There was also speculation that Inspector Forth may have aided Ellen Rees by positioning himself near Louise in the lineup. He denied any such misconduct, but all of this reduces the credibility of Mrs. Rees's statement. The witnesses who recognised the shawl, Maud Clifford and Ernest Mooney, provided contradictory testimony. Mr. Mooney said at one point that he had never seen such a design before, but he later stated that such a shawl could be bought almost anywhere. Then there's the potential that Louise was speaking the truth the whole time. Everyone agrees that Louise was with Manfred near London Bridge until approximately 3 p.m. Louise herself said this was the case, and the evidence of Thomas Bonner, the bus conductor, Georgina Worley and Ellen Rees backs up her claim. Louise had driven 47 minutes from the Birdcage public house to London Bridge. We know she was in the station until approximately 3 o'clock. Assuming she subsequently returned to Dalston by getting another omnibus, she would not have arrived until about 3:47 p.m. at the earliest. This, of course, is consistent with the medical findings, but we must also account for a return to London Bridge. Louise couldn't possibly have returned until 4:45 at the earliest. As a result, if she did in fact take the 4:07 train to Brighton, she must have been innocent. A fresh possible witness came forward while the trial was still in progress. Henry James Streeter worked as a server at Mutton's restaurant on 81 to 84 King's Road in Brighton on the 27th of October. He recalled the day well because the weather had been exceptionally bad. As a consequence, business was slow and he had just 2 clients all day. The first was a man, while the second was a lady clothed in black. The lady arrived at 6 o'clock and remained for 45 minutes. Mr. Mutton, the owner, and Mr. Streeter both thought that if they saw the lady again, they would be able to identify her. Of course, if this lady was Louise, it would demonstrate that she was in Brighton well before 7:18 p.m. Mr. Streeter and Mr. Mutton presented their testimony to a solicitor who then contacted Louise's defence team. They decided not to summon either individual to testify at the trial. Only after Louise had been condemned to death were any serious attempts made to put this prospective evidence to the test. Louise was merely asked as to what she had eaten at the restaurant, and she couldn't recall anything. She made 2 statements, each slightly different. In the first, she claimed to have spent 2 shillings and 6pence on 2 pieces of hot meat with gravy and vegetables, bread and butter, and either ale or beer. In the second, she left off the bread and butter and claimed that it only cost 1 shilling and 9pence. Neither agreed with the restaurant's records, which said that the lady who had been there had eaten bread and butter and drank tea. As a consequence, the evidence was ruled inadmissible and neither possible witness was permitted to visit Louise. Other possible witnesses who may have testified were never summoned by the defence. David Taylor resided in Holywell Lane, London, but on the 27th of October at about 3:45 he boarded a bus at the intersection of Bishopsgate Street and Cornhill. He saw 2 women with a youngster who seemed to be quite fidgety and petulant. More crucially, on the 27th, John Hughes Ellis was on a bus that stopped at London Bridge Station between 3:15 and 3:30. He saw 2 ladies and a child who seemed to be reluctant to be with them. The younger lady took the infant and sat across from Mr. Hughes Ellis. The times of these 2 sightings do not, of course, match those given by Louise, who stated that she did not hand over Manfred until shortly before 4 p.m. Mr. Taylor, however, admitted that he may have miscalculated the time. Other evidence was also there, but it was never presented to the defence. A letter intended for Louise was brought to Newgate Jail towards the end of 1899. It was dated the 26th of December and reads as follows. The women of Chelsea must keep out of sight, but they are not anxious to hang you. If the porter at Dalston Junction would speak, he could tell you who he saw at 4:45 there. Anyway, put this in your lawyer's hands. It may save you. The officials never sent the letter. Of course, all this might be for nothing. The letter was almost certainly a fraud, but there are 2 possibilities. Louise was either guilty or innocent. Which of the 2 scenarios is most likely? Louise's sole plausible motivation for killing her son was that Manfred was a financial or emotional burden in her continued relationship with Eudore Lucas. There was no proof that Louise was in financial distress, and Eudore stated that they had never discussed marriage. Louise, therefore, had no legitimate reason for the crime. To put this aside, if Louise was guilty, she would have travelled all the way into central London just to be seen by witnesses at London Bridge Station. She then returned to Dalston Junction, presumably unnoticed by any other bus conductor or passenger, murdered her son in the bathroom, stripped him naked, placed her new shawl over the body, despite the fact it might be immediately connected to her. She then returned to London Bridge, this time again unnoticed by any bus driver, train employee or passenger, and allowed herself to be seen by Ellen Reese. She then took a later train to Brighton, attempting to provide an alibi by claiming she had arrived earlier and dined at Mutton's. The same cold assassin then left some of Manfred's clothes in the women's waiting area at Brighton Station, thereby explicitly tying herself to the crime. The other possibility is that Louise was innocent and hence speaking the truth. The Brownings kidnapped the youngster just before 4 p.m, took him to Dalston and killed him. The garments were removed from the body and placed in a bag with the other items Louise had turned over to them. A bag provided to her by Helen Gentle. The next day, one or both of the murderers drove to Brighton and deposited the package in the station's waiting area. After all, Louise had informed the Brownings that she was going to Brighton and children were being killed for much less than £12. Regarding Louise's inability to recall what she had eaten at Mutton's, keep in mind that she had no idea she would need an alibi and was being asked to recall something she had eaten 2 months prior. Louise is supposed to have admitted her guilt before her execution. Even here there is further doubt. Some reports state that just before the trap was sprung at Newgate she said, "What I am about to suffer is just, and now my conscience is clear." Other sources say that the supposed confession took place the night before her execution and consisted of only the words, "What I suffer is just." If the remarks were said, they might just as well have been those of a mother expressing her remorse in handing over her beloved Manfred to his true murderers. What is certain is that Louise was hanged on the 9th of January 1900 at Newgate Prison. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed the content, click the subscribe and like buttons so you can receive more content like this strange story every week. See you next time.